Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Dirt Road Tourist. So, today I want to talk about rooftop tents. If you watch many overlanding videos on YouTube or follow any overlanders on Instagram, you might be forgiven for coming to the conclusion that a rooftop tent is a requisite for being a real overlander. Spoiler, they're not. While they do bring a lot of functionality to an overlanding rig, they can come with a hefty price tag and have some specific drawbacks that it's good to be aware of going into any purchase decision. In addition to that, there is a bewildering array of manufacturers and models out there now, and it can be difficult to figure out which rooftop tent is the right one for you, your style of travel and camping, your budget, and just as important, your vehicle. Today, we're going to dive into some of the questions you should be asking if you're considering the purchase of a rooftop tent. So stay tuned. Hello and welcome. My wife Susan and I, we're on a mission to explore the byways of this country to find the food, the people, and even the odd stuff. We're exploring where the roads lead after you leave the interstates behind and beyond where the roads end. Whether you're thinking about getting started overlanding or rocking a fully built rig, I'll be talking about the places we go and giving tips to make your journeys go smoother. And it all starts now on this episode of the Dirt Road Tourist. Welcome, it's good to have you here. I'm Ken, and I'm your host for the Dirt Road Tourist. If you're joining me for the first time, look for that like and follow button and hit that up. If you're a returning listener and haven't yet, help an overlander out, will you? It really helps the channel grow. Also, if you look us up on Apple Podcasts, you can leave a review. If you're feeling kind, please do, because it really bumps us up in the search results. I don't mind talking to my microphone here, but an audience is a nice bonus to this podcasting stuff. With that out of the way, let's dive into today's subject. So, you're weighing the purchase of a rooftop tent, or worse, have already purchased one that doesn't meet your expectations. You have a number of things to consider about such an investment in your overlanding rig. The right rooftop tent can greatly enhance your camping experience and can be your home away from home, while the wrong one can have wide ranging negative effects, impacting everything from the comfort of your sleep to the ease of your setups and breakdowns to the entire gear load out on your rig. Given that this will likely be the biggest ticket equipment purchase, not counting your vehicle mods, that you will make, it is important to be sure you get this one right before you pull out your credit card. And it's not a one size fits all. I can't tell you that X is the right best rooftop tent, just buy this one, or this would be a 3-minute episode. The ideal rooftop tent selection is going to be affected by a number of factors, so let's dig into what those are. Your vehicle is going to be one of the considerations in what tent to go with. If you overland in a Ford F-250, then, well, congratulations, this part doesn't apply to you. Bolt anything you want to that hoss. Before we bought our Tacoma, we had a 2018 JLU with a soft top. While it is absolutely possible to run a rooftop tent on a JLU, and plenty of people do, probably the single best feature of that vehicle to me was the ability to fold the top back on sunny days. Putting a rooftop tent on that Jeep would have required the installation of an external roof rack system, which, along with the tent, would have meant the roof stayed put. And that wasn't a trade off I was willing to make, so we ended up using a Gazelle T3 tent when we overlanded. Overlanded. Is that even a word? Anyway, took trips in it. Sometimes the vehicle makes the decision for you. All vehicles have a gross vehicular weight rating, or GWVR, and a max cargo capacity. Going over the design weight limits for your rig can impact all aspects of its performance, from cornering, acceleration, stopping distances, the list goes on. The weight capacity of your roof and roof rack system is also something you'll want to take into account. So bolting a 200-pound James Baroud Evasion to the top of a Subaru will probably overload the crossbars. You can beef up a vehicle's weight tolerance a bit by upgrading the rack, but when you shop for those, be sure to look up both the static and dynamic weight rating. Put basically, a static weight rating is how much weight a rack can support when the vehicle is parked. And you want to make sure that the weight of your tent and the weight of your everything you want to put into it, your spouse, your kids, your jackery, the cat, the dog, whatever, isn't going to exceed the static rating. Dynamic is how much weight the rack is designed to support when you're moving, going around curves, hard braking, bouncing over the trails, that kind of stuff. The tent itself should come in under that number. You'll want to make sure you're not bolting more weight onto the roof than it's designed to handle. Something like a Thule Tepui Low Pro is going to be a better choice if weight is a major limiting factor on your rig. How many people are you camping with on an average trip? Are you camping with kids, pets? What capacity tent do you need to accommodate everybody? Rooftop tents come in different sizes and sleeping capacities. So something like a Smittybuild XL has room for the whole family, yeah, but it's an awful big box to bolt up on top. So you need a vehicle with the real estate to mount one of those. Also, you need to ask what kind of travel you do and your style of overlanding, and that will also be a factor in your choice of tents. Are you planning to go full time? Actually, if you are, you probably already know what to buy and you don't need me to tell you. If you're more of a weekend warrior like the most of us are, how many trips do you plan to take a year? If you're only able to work in a couple of trips a year, that James Baroud I mentioned earlier runs around 5 grand. It's a really nice rooftop tent, but is it worth it for you? If you're planning on traveling frequently, something like the iCamp or SkyCamp offers quick setup and breakdown on short, fast moving trips. If you're planning on doing longer, more leisurely trips or don't go out as often, then maybe something like a CVT Mount Rainier is going to be a slower to set up, but it'll be more spacious and it'll be durable. Another consideration is where you're going to be camping mostly. If you live in Colorado or the Pacific Northwest, waterproofing and insulation are likely to be top of list features on a tent for you. If you're based out of Phoenix, Arizona or the South, well, yeah, excellent ventilation will make warm weather camping a lot more bearable. Models like the Roof Nest Falcon, those offer interior insulation as an add on accessory and will be a good choice for colder and wetter climates. And something like maybe the ARB Simpson or like the CVT Pioneer that we've got with windows on all four sides offers great airflow when Mother Nature turns up the heat. As I touched on before, if you are a solo traveler, your criteria in a tent is going to be way different from someone who is camping with a family. Another thing to consider if you plan to travel with pets, does there need to be room for them in the tent as well? You will also need to consider how you will get them into and out of a rooftop tent. Desert Armor makes a roll up fabric cover that wraps over the tent ladder and turns it into a ramp that pets can climb to get into the tent. We were actually looking at one of those, but it turns out our German Shepherd, he sleeps in a crate at home, so he's more comfortable sleeping in the back seat of the truck. So it wasn't a consideration for us. And it worked out well too, because we would definitely need a larger tent to make room for him. Don't worry, we wedge a battery powered fan in the rear sliding window for summer nights and have a Y splitter or on our diesel heater vent for winter camping. Fisher sleeps in style. You might have heard him barking back there. Then there's the budget. In an ideal world, price tags wouldn't be a consideration when choosing a rooftop tent for your rig. And yeah, we don't live in that world, do we? Well, most of us don't. Fortunately, there is a large variety of rooftop tents out there in a wide range of prices. None of them are exactly cheap, but price tags can run anywhere from around $1,000 all the way up to 25,000. 25 grand for a tent? Yeah, if you just want to drool for a little while, Google the Red Tail RT rooftop tent sometime. Fortunately, also, there is a large range of types of rooftop tents in all price ranges. The build quality will be better in the higher end units, of course, but you can sometimes get away with modding a less expensive tent to get something that fits your camping style. For example, the quality of the mattresses that ship with the lower end tents can, let's just say, leave something to be desired. We are on our third rooftop tent. We had a Smitty built on our first Tacoma. I used a Gazelle with the Jeep and are now running a CVT Pioneer on our new Tacoma. And I don't want to bash any specific manufacturer on the show here, but we had a hard shell when we bought our current truck. And that ultimately didn't work for us, and we ended up selling it. But one of our figurative and literal pain points with that tent was a wafer thin mattress that did practically nothing to conceal the hardness of the floor beneath it. We ended up just pitching a mattress altogether and replaced it with a self-inflating one from King Camp. The mattress upgrade not only made the tent sleep a lot more comfortably, but it also made me not want to throw it off a cliff every time I had to close it down. Having to squeeze the air out of that thing didn't help the process go any faster, though. All the same, we used that tent for a year and a half before we decided that we had to go in a different way. And it goes to show that some minor tweaks can go a long way if you find yourself with a tent that isn't performing the way you want. You should look to buy the best quality tent that you can still afford to use after you put it on your rig. That is to say, if the price of the tent is going to blow out your budget to the point to where you can't plan trips, then it's not going to be an improvement to your camping setup. It's just going to be a driveway decoration. There is a category of things to think about when looking at a rooftop tent that fall under the category of intangibles to me, because they're the kind of things that are difficult to assess in one until you actually have it and you can use it. But they are things that can have a major impact on whether a tent is going to work for you or not. The tent that I mentioned just a little bit ago, the one ended up selling, well, one of its better features was how it folded up to a relatively thin profile on top of the truck, and it was fairly aerodynamic. But that was also its biggest drawback, at least for us. Let me get into what made that tent completely unworkable for us, because these are the kinds of things that you're probably not going to be thinking about until it's too late and you spend a bunch of money on something that you hate. So one of the first things about that was it was a hard shell. So the entire back wall, when it was opened up, was just a solid sheet of plastic. And that thing, let me tell you, folks, it was a cave. Talk about the back wall being just windowless. There was no view on that one side of the tent either, so you had to be really careful about how you parked your vehicle in a campsite. Because if there was a really good view out one side of the campsite, you didn't wanna park the back wall of the tent facing that, or you're just gonna totally miss out on that view. There's also not a lot of light that came into that tent. It was pretty dark. Like I said, it was a cave, which that might be a feature for late sleepers, but for us, it felt very dark and very closed off. We get out to enjoy the outdoors, not wall it off. So again, your criteria may be different. Another thing about that one that drove me nuts was that no bedding could stay in that tent. That means that all bedding had to come out of it. That's blankets, that's pillows, that's everything had to come out. I'm pretty sure if I left my wallet up there, I'd have to climb back up and remove it in order to get that thing closed. Our bedding had to be stored elsewhere in the rig then, which takes up a lot of precious storage space, which was another pain point for me. And it also really lengthened the breakdown process in the mornings because I had to pull out all the bedding. I had to squeeze the air out of that mattress and then try to close it down. And even with all of that stuff out, it was usually a battle to try to get the latches to shut on it. So it ended up putting me into a foul mood by the time we were back in the rig and ready to start the day. So we ended up going back to a soft shell tent and learning that the clamshell style doesn't work for the way we like to use our tent. Maybe not all clamshells are that way, I don't know, but I haven't bought a whole bunch of them and can't afford to buy a whole bunch of them. But we went into this purchase of our current tent with windows and ventilation on all sides and bedding flexibility in our front of our mind. So our new tent, which is the CVT Pioneer, has a flannel lined sleeping bag that we bought that was offered as an accessory by the manufacturer, and it just stays up in the tent. It's good for temps down into the 40s. It has the little thing that wraps around the mattress like a fitted sheet that keeps the sleeping bag from moving. It's great. We love it. So you can also insert a camp blanket for extra warmth, and the tent still folds down even with that up there. Anything below the upper 30s, we're going to be taking the diesel heater anyway, so we can just use the factory sleeping bag and skip the blanket at that point. Our pillows stay up in the tent. And let me tell you, folks, this is huge because there's really no good place to put a pair of pillows whenever you're If it's not going to be in the tent, it's really hard to work those into your loadout in the rig very well. So factors like this can be the hardest to evaluate when you're shopping for a tent because, A, you won't necessarily know yet that they're a deal breaker for you until you've taken a couple of trips with it. And B, the manufacturer, they're not likely to advertise that everything thicker than a credit card's going to have to come out of their product in order to have a snowball's chance of folding it back down. They don't like to mention that kind of stuff. So, how do you find out about some of the potential pain points of a tent that you're considering buying? Well, the first technique is to watch videos. So, put a tent model that you're looking at into a YouTube search and look for video reviews. And you want to look for videos from lesser known content creators because they're less likely to be reviewing a tent that they got for free and they're helping to market it. The reviewers who are actually running the tent that they're reviewing, they're more likely going to talk about the things that they don't like about the product in their videos. Another really good way to evaluate a tent is to go to overlanding events. And this is one of the best ways to window shop, if you will, for these things, is to go to an overlanding event. If you feel like you have to already have an overlanding rig to go to an overlanding event, that's the same mistake we made originally. There are dozens of these events throughout the year, all over the country. Buy a ticket, pack up the camping gear you already have, and head out. And you're going to find that there are people who attend and camp at these events in everything from earth rummers to RAV4s with a tent pitched to the side. You can walk around these events and see tents of all types, vehicles of all makes, some modified, some stock. Some people at these events, they've worked really hard building out their rigs and they're proud of them. And if you walk up and ask them about it, they're probably just going to be getting off to a good start by the time they've told you everything you wanted to know. So it's really easy to walk around these things. You see, a tent that you're looking at, and just go up and ask. Hey, how do you like that Smitty built, or how do you like that Alucab? And most people are going to actually talk your ear off about it. People at these events are not squeamish about talking about their equipment. You also, if you go to one of these events, you want to look for vehicles of the same model as the one that you're using. You may get a lot of valuable insight into what works on your car or truck and what doesn't. If there's a rooftop tent that you've had your eyes on, chances are good you will find someone with one at the event and you'll get an honest review of it rather than a sales pitch. Also, most of these events will have a vendor row, and there will be a number of companies there with their products on display. And this is the perfect opportunity to get a chance to climb up into a number of different models and really get to look them over from all sides. There are also two major Overland expos, which are on the East Coast, usually in Virginia in the fall, and one on the West Coast. Overland Expo East and West have huge vendor turnouts and are a great place to comparison shop equipment when you are considering a big ticket purchase. In most states, also, there's going to be a number of towns that host a monthly Rigs and Coffee. These are typically hosted at Surprise, a coffee shop, or maybe a brewery or a 4x4 accessories dealer. There are all kinds of them. They're all over the place. They're usually free to attend. There's not going to be as many rigs there as you'll find at the overlanding events, but they don't involve any camping. So, if you don't have equipment now, but you're looking to purchase some, maybe you can get out to one of those and you can see a number of overland equipped vehicles, I should say, there and talk to some of the people who own that about their equipment and get a better idea of some stuff that you might want to be looking at. So, what about these drawbacks that I talked about? Because during the intro, I mentioned that there are some drawbacks to running a rooftop tent on your rig. So, yeah, let's get into some of those. One of the biggest drawbacks, and you might have already heard this elsewhere on the internet, is that with a rooftop tent, you can't set a base camp. Once the tent is deployed, you have to pack it back down before you can move your vehicle again. Now, this isn't a major deal for Susan and I because we're either camping in a pre reserved spot, so it's going to be waiting for us when we show up, Or if we're looking for dispersed camping, those are typically going to be on the way from point A to point B. Our style of travel doesn't lend itself to claiming a spot and circling back to it at the end of a day of exploring. We're looking for spots along our route and we're not going back. For us, probably the biggest downside to a rooftop tent is that your fuel mileage is going to take a hit once you mount one of the things. Our Tacoma off road averaged around 20 miles per gallon or so unmodified. After the bed rack and the tent went on, we were hitting somewhere between 17 and 18. Now, 3 miles per gallon doesn't sound like a major hit, and I'm not hurting for the extra gas money necessarily, but the third gen Tacoma doesn't have the greatest range to start with. So you really feel any change in your gas mileage, particularly when you're traveling in an area with sparse fueling options. Or if you're on a really long trip, a long drive for a day, and you're having to stop over and over again for gas. Another one of the drawbacks is that a rooftop tent is going to take up most, if not all, of your roof real estate. If you like to take things like kayaks with you on your trips, these are going to be difficult, if not impossible, to take without adding a trailer to the mix. Also, adding a bed rack to a truck or a roof rack to an SUV can provide an awful lot of gear storage, but most of that's going to be gobbled up by the rooftop tent. We have a low profile bed rack on Bonnie and a deck drawer system. And particularly since we added our German Shepherd Fisher to our travel team, we lost our back seat. The whole back seat. He's 90 pounds at 8 months, so we've just resigned ourselves to the fact that the whole back seat is his territory. So I'm finding the low clearance in the bed of the truck a bit confining. Also, the back seat was our primary weatherproof storage spot before, but that's another issue for another episode. So, what about alternatives? If you decide that you're going to skip the rooftop tent altogether, what is the alternative? Well, heck, you could be pulling a two-man Coleman dome tent out at the end of the day, and as long as you're dependent only on what you carry in your vehicle on a trip, you're overlanding. But there are a number of upgrades to a backpacking tent for overlanding. One of the most popular is going to be a hub tent, like the ones made by Gazelle. These tents are tall enough to stand up in, and they set up in a couple of minutes. The things are huge, but they're sturdy and they're spacious. We have a queen size cot system that looks like a postage stamp in ours, and still leaves plenty of room to pull in our folding chairs on rainy camp days, things like that. They're a convenient and comfortable setup, and they're really popular among the overlanding community. Seriously, you're going to see a lot of people out there running the Gazelles, and it's for a good reason. With any ground tent, a level campsite, of course, is a must, and you have to be mindful of the weather and where you're setting it up so you don't find yourself sleeping in a swamp in the middle of the night. And that's one of the advantages of a rooftop tent is that you can put leveling blocks, traction boards, heck, grab a couple of good old-fashioned rocks and throw them under one or two of the wheels of your vehicle, and you level your rig in just about any campsite. And if your rooftop tent gets flooded out in the middle of the night, well, I just gotta tell you, you really set up camp in the wrong spot. So another option is to look at taking a trailer. This is a great way to add a rooftop tent to your equipment without having to mount it to the rig itself. They also add back the ability to set up a base camp with your rooftop tent and have your vehicle freed up to go hit the trails or do some exploring around an area. Four solid walls and a door that you can lock at night. A lot of them have built-in kitchen setups, refrigerators, electrical systems, water storage, heck, even heating and AC, which can really make camping a lot less like, roughing it. There has been a bit of an explosion of overlanding legit camping trailers that I've seen hit the market over the past couple of years. It seems that RV manufacturers have finally taken notice that there's a big overlanding community, and they are rushing to put out trailers that can handle, a little terrain. There is also a good number of manufacturers out there putting out some absolute beasts of overlanding trailers that can handle anything that a rig is capable of dragging them over. Now, whether a trailer works for your setup and what kind of trailer, that's going to get back to what kind of vehicle you're using for your overlanding adventures. You will need a rig with enough towing capacity to handle pulling the trailer. I'm not going to get into the whole thing about GWVR tongue weight, the finer points of trailering capacities in this episode, because that could probably fill a couple of them just talking about that alone. Just make sure you put enough hoss in front of the wagon, that's all. But even with a rig that's capable of pulling a trailer, you got to consider what type of adventure travel you want to take it on. If your plan is to mostly pull it on paved or gravel roads and set it up as a base camp and then wheel from there, then you've got a wide range of models out there to pick from. If your travel style tends more towards like the expedition travel, then you'll need a trailer that's capable of taking the beating of actual off road travel. But even if the trailer is tough enough to handle it, you also have to account for trails that either get too tight or encountering obstacles that, maybe your truck might get past on its own, no problem. But it suddenly becomes a problem when it's turned into a combined vehicle that's twice its length and hinged in the middle. Off road travel with a trailer takes more planning, and you really have to know what you're getting into before you turn off into the dirt. Another alternative to a traditional overlanding rig with rooftop tent will be vans. Remember that old cautionary line that parents used to tell their kids? If you're not careful, you'll end up living in a van down by the river. Only nowadays, the river is an Instagram worthy stretch of trout waters with a view of the mountains in the background, and the van costs $250,000. There are a number of companies that build Class B van RVs that literally have it all. And there are plenty of them built on top of legit off-road four-wheel drive capable chassis. If you want something that is a straight up no build, here just take my check and hand me the keys adventure vehicle, one of those might be worth looking at. Just bring deep pockets. But some of these van rigs have full kitchens, wet baths. You can straight up live out of these things. And they'll get you into and back out of plenty of epic campsites. If my stock options do well enough by the time I retire, or if we hit the lottery, you'll find us traveling the country in one of those most likely. Now, that's my rundown of things to consider when buying a rooftop tent. It's one of the most important purchases you're going to make on your rig. It's where you're going to spend the most time on your trips outside of the driver's seat of your vehicle. So, finding the right tent is going to make the most difference in your quality of life out on your journeys. I hope that some of the things that I've talked about today help you to track down that perfect model that makes your adventures more enjoyable. If there's anything you think I left out, drop me an email at ken@dirtroadtourist.com. Anyway, that's my show for the week. Be sure to join me here next Monday for another episode of The Dirt Road Tourist. Seriously, my audience is still small enough that I'll know it if you skip out on me. If you're still here after 11 episodes, just hit the doggone button already. And as always, have a great week and go see something amazing.